Okay, folks, here we are. First day of Social Justice Online. Just going to get through this one and then see if the next videos we do will be any more jazzier. What's going to happen today? Don't forget you need to take that attendance quiz to show that you were here. Don't answer no or you will not get credit for being here. You have to watch this video about 15 minutes. And in the video, I'm just going to talk about the first part of our study guide for this kind of last section that we've been in. And then today, you'll have a few questions to answer at the end of all of this based on what I talk about today, with one extra question thrown in of something that happens sometime during this video that you're watching right now, and you'll be done for the day. So the overarching claim of what we've been doing the last several weeks in class is that our country has become a kind of Miss Eliot's classroom in terms of how we have thought about and assigned meaning to race. To get us into this, I started by talking about generalizations and the reality that we generalize all the time. To generalize is to form an overarching conclusion based on particular experiences or observations. We generalize whenever we take what we know about one specific instance and assume that that specific instance applies to all similar situations. And it's important to note that doing so is a very important human skill. If we couldn't generalize, we couldn't navigate the world and all the new things that we encounter every single day that are very similar to what we've already encountered. So generalizing is a muscle that we have, and we use it all the time, and we need to use it all the time. The problem is that we also use that muscle in terms of people. We form stereotypes about people. We make generalizations based on individual experiences or even what we've heard, and assume that that applies to all the people that we categorize in the same group. Now, this is a little bit of a, as we move on here, we'll talk about how stereotypes can become self-fulfilling, and how once we have a stereotype in mind, whether we think of it ourselves or whether somebody else tells us or it's just handed on to us kind of in the water of our society, they can become very self-fulfilling. The first way is that we're basically watching out for examples. Our antennae are up, and so when we see something that fits our stereotype, we notice it. What we don't notice are all the many times the stereotype isn't true, or even when the stereotype is true about other people. We're just focused in on what we think is true, and whenever we see an example of it, we see that as proof of that stereotype. The second way that stereotypes can become self-fulfilling is that when you have systems of discrimination backing up stereotypes, then they can actually push things to become the way that the stereotype says that they are. And we see that in Miss Eliot's classroom, the way that when she tells us that the students are disruptive or unruly or not very smart, just the pressure of that situation causes some to be disruptive and unruly and to not do well. Stereotypes can be positive and stereotypes can be neutral, but often stereotypes are negative. And when they're negative, then they are either that they become prejudices and they can lead to discrimination. Prejudice is an unfavorable opinion or an attitude of hostility formed against a person or group based on a stereotype, and discrimination is the denial of fair treatment or equal justice for a person or group of persons based on prejudgment. Key thing about discrimination is that you have to have some sort of power in order to discriminate. You have to have some way of taking away fair treatment or equal justice from a person. Anybody can have a prejudice, and most of us are prejudiced in various ways, but in order to discriminate, there has to be power. Two other definitions that are important as this section unfolds. First off, we know that race is a way of defining people based on physical appearance, fixating on heritable characteristics that are passed down when you're born, and usually it's only a certain type of heritable characteristic that we focus on. The differences that are salient, the differences that protrude, that are easy to see from a distance. We have all kinds of differences, as I talked about a lot of times in class, But race takes the ones that are big and that you can see from across the room, the ones that are salient, and think that they tell us about different kinds of people. Ethnicity is really a categorization of people based on culture, not appearance, but culture. And ethnicity does tell us a lot of the ways that we are different as people. Ethnic group is a group of people who identify with each other through a common heritage that's real or assumed, and it basically ethnicity takes shape in the way that we live our lives. Now, in terms of what happens in Miss Elliott's classroom, here are some details to remember about the overarching situation. First off, Jane Elliott, she's a third grade teacher in Iowa. She started the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise after Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered in 1968. The footage we saw of her classroom was from 1970. When she worked with the adults, that was 1984. In the classroom in 1970, she tells the students that blue-eyed students are better than brown-eyed people. She makes the brown-eyed kids wear collars. Remember the salient differences from before? They have to have the collars, otherwise you can't tell from a distance what group a person is in. She reduces the privileges of the brown-eyed kids, and she increases the privileges of the blue-eyed kids. And then she proves the things that she says about blue-eyed people, that they are better and brown-eyed people are worse, by using generalizations, taking specific things that she's cherry-picked from stories that she's heard them tell, and using that to prove that everyone like those people are that way. Now, Brian stands up to her immediately. His dad is brown-eyed. He says his dad is not stupid, but she quickly attacks Brian personally, kind of puts his dad down, and basically sends a message to him and to others that if you fight this system, you are going to pay. And so no one else really wants to stand up to her after that. During that first day, something really important happens, this moment with Lori. And tomorrow, on Thursday, I'm going to ask you to talk about this moment and why it's so important. It's important because in this moment, we can see Mrs. Elliott's paradigm, her system taking root. She's told the students that brown-eyed people are worse. She's given them all these examples, but it won't work until they start to actually do it themselves. When they start to see things and interpret those things to fit into this framework. And so this is the moment where it starts to happen. Lori is late getting to the page, and Lori is, every other student is there, every other brown-eyed student is there, every other blue-eyed student is on the page, but Miss Elliott draws attention to Lori and basically focuses the whole student population there that something is wrong. But it's not until a student chimes in with, "She is a brown eye," that you see it has taken effect. The student now, and the rest of the students taking this student's lead, will do this as well. They're going to take what Lori does as symbolic, as meaningful, as indicative of the way that all brown people are. She's not an individual anymore. She, in her failure, tells us about the failure of all brown people. And the logic is circular here. It doesn't make sense, of course, because on one hand, they're saying that she is slow is because she's brown-eyed, but then we say the reason that brown-eyed people are slow is because she is slow. But that's what happened. This is one of those moments when your antenna are up. Once you have an idea planted in your mind, you might start seeing things, and you'll see that as a fulfillment of what you've been told. Obviously, it's not a fulfillment. Obviously, it's just one individual, but your brain wants to take that one instance and see it as indicative of the larger group. And so remember, it's a student who says, "She's a brown eye." It's a student who generalizes there. And that's what they're going to do for the rest of the time they were part of this exercise. Just some other things that happen in the classroom with the students that's worth remembering about, and which I could ask you, what do you think these mean? So, of course, we saw how this wasn't just something that they were told. It actually had an effect. It affected their feelings and kind of their inner insides, the expressions they had. Some kids were gleeful and joyful. Other kids were just glum and sad and confused. We saw them hiding during recess. This really had an effect. It has an effect in that it led to violence. A brown-eyed kid hits a blue-eyed kid. And it's just crazy kind of how things go from peaceful the day before to there's this division and there's actual violence based on that division. Of course, the brown-eyed kid is the one who does the punching. The brown-eyed kid is probably the one who's going to get punished. We already believe, based on what Miss Elliott said, that brown-eyed kids are violent. We have proof now. The brown-eyed kid will probably be expelled. It becomes one of those self-fulfilling things. Another self-fulfilling thing are the flashcards and how the kids who are told they're smart do better than the kids who are told they're stupid as they try to deal with that feeling and all that sort of thing. And just another thing that's interesting to me is the way that when the kids are told to switch the second day, the kids jump up to place the collars on the other kids. There's no empathy, really. There's no desire to spare someone from their suffering. They are eager to be on top. And this is another slide somewhere, but I'll talk about it here. Remember, this is a reminder that in order to have discrimination, you have to have power, and also people get something out of discrimination. It's not just people being mean towards others. Often the people who are doing the discriminating are the ones who are benefiting in some way, and that's the reason why they'll go along with it. They're told they're better, they get more privileges, they kind of feel more out of it, and that is a reason why they are willing to go along with the system. Now, in terms of the adults, when she does it with the adults, the thing that I'd like you to think about is the way that when you have this kind of system, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Basically, when you treat people this way, like Miss Elliott treats these adults, then she's able to prove, again with quotation marks, to prove that people are less and people are bad, and then basically it becomes a thing, if you try to fight it, you just basically prove more of what's being said about you. So remember, to set up that day, she first demeans the adults, the blue-eyed adults, by forcing them to wait long and not letting them sit down, and so they're kind of in an angry mood already. And then, as they respond out of that anger, the things they do will be perfect fodder for Miss Elliott to prove what she said. What do the adults do? Well, Karen, of course, tries to defy Miss Elliott. She fights her, tries to get in her face and all that sort of thing. But that's just what Miss Elliott needs to prove her point. Karen puts her gum under her seat. Well, that's just proof that blue-eyed people are destructive and inconsiderate. Karen tries to fight Miss Elliott, but that's just a good way of seeing that blue-eyed people are rude and disruptive. She's disruptive and she's defiant. In terms of the quiz, she doesn't put her name on it, and then she again gets in a battle with Miss Elliott. And again, it's proof from Miss Elliott's eyes, and as she goes to everybody in the room, that blue-eyed people cannot follow directions and that they seek attention in everything they do. Another way to respond is to be indifferent and try to kind of check out and just say, I won't participate. But that's exactly what Miss Elliott is able to use then to prove her point about blue-eyed people. His indifference means that he doesn't have his answers written down and he hasn't been paying attention. So when she challenges on it, Roger can't do anything but kind of stutter about, and then she's able to use that as proof of how stupid he is. And it's remember how Roger talks about it later. He says, he felt hopeless. He felt like just no power whatsoever. Whatever he did, he knew it was just going to dig the hole deeper. And remember, most of the blue-eyed people aren't doing anything wrong, but because you have Roger doing something wrong, then Miss Elliott's able to prove and put all the blue-eyed people in this same boat. The point I talked about earlier, that a key component of discrimination is that the people on top get something out of the system. The blue-eyed kids get more recess and they're told they're smart. The brown-eyed adults don't get badgered and they get the nicer seats and they kind of get to watch the fireworks. There's always something that comes with discrimination that helps the people who discriminate to actually do it. Okay, so I'm sitting in my room for this, and back when I had a classroom, I had this up on my wall in my classroom. This is a picture of the Bean in Chicago, and I like this picture for a lot of reasons. One cool thing about it is you can tell it's very early, right after they unveiled the Bean, because you can see the lines between the different plates of mirror that they have there. They hadn't smoothed it out yet. They opened it up, then they closed it again and smoothed out those lines because people were so eager to see it. Another cool thing is that I'm in this picture, and good luck to you to see if you could find me in this picture. But I'll ask a question on the quiz about the bean. I'll ask what is the significance of those lines, the kind of the grid lines there on the surface of the bean itself.